I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I have a special guest for you today, appropriately in darkness almost. John Bukowski is a musician and music nerd, I would say, of the highest order. John, I know you played in Ebony Sorrow, but you've played in a bunch of bands. I can't even begin to say how many bands you've played in over the years, but you're a guitar player, musician, and one of the biggest heavy metal nerds I know. So what we're really going to do today is talk about metal and your podcast, A Dangerous Meeting, because I want to promote it and promote what you're doing. We go back a long time. We met in the real world when I lived in Syracuse. You live in Syracuse. John Bukowski, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
Basically, I am, like you said, I am a heavy metal nerd, and I'm actually still doing Ebony Sorrow all these years later. Like, we've been a band for like 22 years now, which is kind of fucking crazy to say out loud. But other than that, I run like a small record label here and there, and I drive around and nerd out with I work with people with developmental disabilities, and I do a lot of my music listening there. So sometimes my guys like it, and other times they give me a look like I'm absolutely insane.
I'm in the same field for the day job, and I have done that before too. I have sometimes I've told the kids, hey, if you don't calm down in the van, I'm going to play Misery Index. So prepare yourself. But yeah, Ebony Sorrow, for people who don't know, is a pretty crazy hybrid of different styles of metal, but more themed in the, I guess, kind of black metal as a starting point. Or am I correct in that?
Yeah, like basically the one when we started, we had Sean Lewis singing for us. The idea was to start a band that sounded like a cross between Turmoil and Dissection, and it failed miserably at first. And
it's an interesting combination, by the way.
Yeah, we were like, nerds that were like into both. We're like, no one's doing this. So we tried and we failed, and we ended up becoming a black metal band over the years, and then just kind of like evolved into like a death metal band as we got older and better musicianship and things like that.
Right. And so you play guitar, correct?
Not anymore, actually, because I have two guitar players who are much better than me, and I do vocals. I was playing guitar for a very, very long time, and then the other guy who I got to replace another person who quit was writing songs that were so good, and I wasn't going to be able to do vocals and play them at the same time. And so
Gotcha.
I had to find someone who could do the guitar playing because I wanted to hold on to the vocals.
But you've played in a bunch of different genres before. You've played in hardcore bands, you've played in noisy bands, you've played in punk bands and all kinds of things. So are there other bands out there that you've been in that you might want to point people to?
I used to, the first thing that comes to mind is I used to play in a weird math rock band called Department, and I think they have something up. As far as stuff that's like out there, like I've done a lot of stuff, but not a lot of stuff is out there. I did a dialysis, which I'm still doing, which I'm really we have a lot of fun with, which is like me and Ryan Candlemass and the drummer from Ebony Sorrow. Yeah. And it's basically, we call it it's like a comedy show with blast beats.
Right. Yeah, I've been in bands like that before. We had one in Indiana called Moshed into Oblivion.
Nice.
So kind of similar thing. But so you're from Syracuse, and for people we can't assume that, because a lot of my listeners are people who are come to this from books and reading, and we're introducing people to what I want to kind of do is introduce people to like somewhere where they can discover metal music if they have not, they don't have a really good source for the new stuff, the good stuff. Bukowski, for those who don't know, is somebody that I follow. Just his playlists from the podcast is a really good place to find music because you just drill down on that stuff. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but let's talk about how you got into music in general, because a lot of this journey is, for us as people who got into weird music or extreme music, now it's easy to get into it because it's on the internet, but we come from a time before it was as ubiquitous as the internet. How did you get into, was it hardcore or metal first that you got into?
I would say it was metal first. I started off, my dad played a lot of prog records when I was a kid. And I got my favorite band of all time is still Genesis. You know what I mean? It's the one thing that me and my dad agree on.
Right.
And so I got really into that. And then I eventually got into a lot of the more aggressive hip hop because that's what was going on in my neighborhood when I was about like 10 to 12. And then I heard Anthrax and Public Enemy working together. And that just opened something up for me that I could not even explain to you. And I asked for Attack of the Killer Bees for Christmas that my uncle got me. And my mom saw the parental advisory sticker before I could peel it off and made me take it back.
Interesting. I'm the Man was one of my first metal records. I got introduced to punk rock and metal at the same time at summer camp, and by a guy who we called Psycho Steve at summer camp. And he gave me a tape that had Dead Kennedys and God We Trust Incorporated on one side and Anthrax, I'm the Man on the other side.
That's an interesting combination.
It's a really weird and interesting combination, but my first punk rock song was Nazi Punks Fuck Off, and I thought it was hilarious because of the F word.
And I mean, and the message actually still stands today. And how many bands have covered that song?
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, it's an important one, but so for you, that Anthrax, hearing that combination was key. Now, people should know what they may not know about Syracuse. Most people think of Syracuse as a college town because they think first of the college, but Syracuse has a long and storied punk rock and hardcore tradition. And one of the things that I love about our homie Carl Buchner from Earth Crisis is that like Carl has recently taken upon himself to really educate people on the history of punk rock in the city because he's much more old school than people realize. And one of the things I love about these smaller towns is that sometimes the scenes are hungrier than the big cities, and in the old school, like for in Indiana, for example, in my hometown, we had the Gizmos in the 70s as being like the first punk band in Indiana, not in Indianapolis, but in Bloomington in the college town, right? And the Gizmos started it all. But Syracuse has a long punk rock and hardcore tradition. So how did you quickly go from discovering metal to finding the scene? Because I'm pretty sure the scene was what got you into being an actual musician, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it was actually probably about 5 or 6 years before I would probably discover. Actually, probably more like 5 years before I would discover hardcore. My neighbor who I was friends with was dating a girl, and she was a hardcore girl, and she lent me Life, Love, Regret and Snapcase's Looking Glass Self. And I put on Life, Love, Regret, and I really dug like the whole vibe of it, like the black on black, like the weird zine inside it. But my first initial reaction is like, wow, this sounds like Death, because I was listening to a lot of Death at the time. I'm like a 17-year-old kid, I don't know much better, and but I really connected with that. And then she snuck me out of the house to go see Bloodlet and Dead Guy at the Lost Horizon, and then you know what I mean. But like when Blood Runs Black,
I was at that show.
So
I'm
actually
pretty sure I was at that show.
That
I was
show
living in Syracuse at the time. So
that show was such a game changer for me. Like 454 Big Block open, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. The guy thinks he's Henry Rollins.
I was definitely there for that show. Yep.
Then when BRB came out, there's Mark with his long hair swinging and Dan screaming. I was like, okay, this is for me. And it's just kind of like escalated from there.
Right. Well, yeah, and I should note that I used to live in Syracuse. So for people, if you're wondering why I was at this random same first show that John was at, during that era, I was living in Syracuse. So, and I remember that show because I definitely wanted to see Dead Guy. I was kind of wanting to see Bloodlet, but I remember I went with Pete Spielman and he liked Big Block. So like I remember distinctly going with Pete and Tom to that show. So yeah, weird. So yeah, small world, right?
Right.
We didn't know each other then, but we were definitely at that same show.
Yeah.
So but yeah, so the scene like that, you know, I guess it's awesome too. Shout out Unbroken from here in San Diego. That although they lived much further south than where I live right now at the time in the area.
You
But
know,
shout out to Unbroken. Yeah, I
I
just
actually interviewed Stephen Andrew Miller from Unbroken for an episode, and I started to nerd out with him for a second. I was like, listen, before we start this, I need to tell you how much life, love, and grub means. And he just said, go stop. He's like, I can't do this. I'm like, I felt bad. He goes, I'm just fucking with you. Go ahead. And I was like, oh my god, you know, like my heart sank. But like he was like he caught me off guard.
I had a science fiction writer do that to me that I interviewed, Norman Spinrad. He's like in his late 70s and he's been one of my favorites and he's been writing since the 60s. And the very first question I asked him, he said, "That's a dumb question." And I was like, oh shit. And it was terrible. But he warmed up and it became a good interview. But it was funny because I was just reading some interview where somebody was talking about him and they were saying he was like the grumpiest person on earth. And I was like, oh shit, I walked right into that, right?
That's amazing.
So
though.
your musical education, did you start playing music right away, playing guitar? How did you decide that you wanted to be a part of it? Was it going to the shows? What was
It was definitely going to the show. I always wanted to do it, but I never really had the gear. You know, I came from a family that didn't have a lot of money, so we definitely didn't have the ability to get a guitar or anything like that. So eventually, I would end up buying a cheap bass and off of a friend in high school, and I kind of learned to play that way, just kind of like by ear. And then eventually I got a guitar cheaply from another friend, and I learned how to drop tune. And once I learned how to drop tune, you know what I mean? I figured I could play Snapcase and Integrity. Like it was all over with.
right? And there was plenty of people starting hardcore bands in that era in the area. So there were plenty of opportunities to fill in for bands, playing bands, try things out. And yeah, so Syracuse in that era, for people who don't know, the biggest straight edge band in the world, Earth Crisis, was kind of the anchor of the hardcore scene. But there was also a lot of like early on, there was your Solstice, your Green Rages, but eventually your Santa Sangres, your Another Victims. But Syracuse had an active and wild enough of a scene that we had people traveling from all over the world who just wanted to see shows in Syracuse, which is still mind-boggling to me. But you know, we had people stayed at our house from all over Europe and Brazil and New Zealand and shit that were just coming to see American hardcore, and they wanted to see it in Syracuse. So don't poo-poo us for how important we were at the time.
It was a really, really crazy time. Like every band wanted to play here. Like I started going around like I said, like I think it was '95 was that first show, but like so like Solstice had been done, like Green Rage had been done, like there was no more Framework or Gatekeeper or anything like that. But Earth Crisis, you know, like they're still going strong. On my first Earth Crisis show, they was their first one back from the accident.
Oh,
And
really? Yeah.
yeah, so that was my first time seeing them. But I still saw for like a long time, like of Hellfest or Syracuse Fest was a perfect example of that. Like so many people came from all over the place to come to Hungry Charlie's to see like, you know, like Harvest and Endeavor and Birthright and Coalesce and like Snapcase and Dissolve all the same 3 days, you know, and it was an amazing time.
Yeah. Yeah, the last time I saw Day of Suffering was in that room in Hungry Charlie's, one of my favorite bands in that era, who, by the way, recorded their album in Syracuse.
I know. And you know, I'm so mad because after the gun went off during Endeavor, like we decided to leave because we thought the show was canceled. And then we heard that it finished off. So I missed Day of Suffering. I missed the Despair set. I missed Hatebreed. I missed like the whole second half after the gunfire. And so I never got to see Day of Suffering, and I'm so bummed about that.
It wasn't their best show, but at the same, they were already starting to like kind of be over it at that point, unfortunately. But yeah, that was a crazy weekend. So what he's referring to is, I think somebody like popped off a gun. I don't think they fired at somebody. They just shot in the air or something.
They shot in the air in the alleyway. Some sort of beef went on, and like someone like drove up a distance, and so there was some sort of beef, and like pepper spray ended up getting sprayed outside of the cover. It came inside the club, and there's actually a video of it happening. The guy from Harvest does a video thing on YouTube called 25 After, and he puts up shows 25 years after the date. He filmed every show that he ever like went on tour with Harvest. And so he has like the whole gun thing going off during the Endeavor set that I watched pretty recently, and it was kind of amusing.
Yeah, interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, it's a really fascinating time for, if you know, I get kind of curious whenever I talk to friends who grew up, like Rob Pennington was on the podcast and we talked a lot about the history of Louisville hardcore, because I'm interested in it. When I talk to Dan O'Mahony, I always grill him about Orange County hardcore, and like, you know, it's weird when you get these myths dispelled too, because like for like decades I thought of Chain of Strength as an Orange County hardcore band, and he was like, oh, those dudes were all from Riverside. And I'm like, which is like an inland town, like an hour away. And it blew my mind that after all these years, to find out that Chain of Strength was not an Orange County hardcore band, that they're from San Bernardino County. It's like finding out, you know, it would be like finding out that Solstice was from Rochester or something. But yeah, it blew my mind. Anyways, so it's a curious and interesting time, because like now people watch shows online, and like anytime a band plays anywhere, you can be like, oh well, I'll see their set on YouTube or whatever, like, and that didn't happen. But back then we had to travel, you know, 10 hours to see a show. We did it all the time. And, you know, I was familiar with Syracuse from my first Syracuse show was the Firestorm record release show at the Lost. And so I saw Green Rage at that show, and Solstice and all that. And, you know, Bloodlet, when they were still much more hardcore, played that show. Chokehold, who I still don't like and never did. But whatever. Anyways, Syracuse was a weird and crazy and interesting place. So, you know, I'm sure it had a huge impact on like the alchemy that makes up your musical taste, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like without a doubt, especially because at the time there was so much going on musically as well. Like there was a lot of hardcore bands that like all sounded different from each other. And a lot of them had a metallic edge. Like, you know what I mean? Like Bloodlet and Integrity and Earth Crisis, none of them sounded like each other. You know what I mean? Like we had bands like 108 and Overcast who were just like doing their own thing. And everything was just absolutely like creative and crazy. And whenever someone put out a new bit, like a record, it was something you'd never heard before. Everything was just like breaking this new ground. And it was like, you just absorbed it all, and you tried to do everything at once. And you know what I mean? When I was playing, I was like, oh, I want to sound like this and this and this, and you never end up like you really sound like anything. You know what I mean? Like when you're like a 18-year-old kid trying to figure it out. But it was I look back on those times, and I wouldn't have ever wanted to like grow up anywhere else or at any other time, honestly, just because it was magical.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I get so fascinated in hearing about these local scenes, because before the internet, it's like, that's why whenever anyone plays me a band of any kind, the first question I have is where are they from?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I want to know, I don't care they're members of this or that. I just want to know what city they're from, because I'm always interested in how regional sounds develop. And for example, in hardcore at the time, like there was a Louisville sound ish, you know, there was a Midwestern sound. There was New York City hardcore sounded a certain way. Boston had a really angry, edgy vibe. Syracuse had the metallic hardcore, like, you know, Clevo had their definite sound. So if you look at all these areas, like they had their sounds, and it was really curious and interesting to think about, you know, before the internet, what town you were in, even like metal, like, you know, Gothenburg, you know, Sweden had a certain sound, you know, like where you came from, Florida death metal had a sound. And that's why things like Cannibal Corpse being from Buffalo is just weird, because like they sound like Florida band and they moved there, right?
I mean, that's that they knew where they were supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like originally, Morbid Angel were a North Carolina band as well, and
Right.
they're like, well, they got to go where the hotbed is. I'm like JD moved from California to Syracuse because he wanted to play hardcore. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's people definitely they go where they have to go, and I get that. You know what I mean? But I've always felt right perfectly here. So
Right, right. But you know, I think we've lost a little bit of that, because if you're if you're a kid that's into 90s hardcore now, right? And there are kids that are retroactively, you know,
right.
retro kids that like that stuff or whatever, you can find it online. So you can find Gatekeeper, Framework, Earth Crisis, early stuff, whatever, that's all available. But at the time, everything was so regional. Like you might have seen a band on tour in the summer. They might have come through in the summer, but the bands you were seeing routinely all the time, like for example, if you're living in Louisville, you're seeing in Kendall, Falling Forward, and Endpoint like over and over again. So if you start a band, you're likely going to end up sounding like that band. Where that's why the regional thing was like that, and it's not like that anymore. I just, you know, I don't think so. So I think it's a fascinating and curious way that music has changed since then to now, you know, but
I agree. What I think is really fascinating is when you take people from like all over the world and they're doing everything digitally. They're not even getting in a room and writing together anymore. You know what I mean? People are just like shipping off a riff, like say like I'm writing here in Syracuse, I could like ship it off to like somebody in Sweden to put drums to, and they could ship it off to somebody in Poland. Like if these people can never actually meet each other and have any idea what they're about, and they're making this art, and then at the same time it's interesting because it's got like, you know, it's got the Swedish guitar sound, but it's got like the overly triggered Polish drum sound and things like that. So things, the hybrids are happening, but at the same time it feels like it's losing authenticity.
I would agree too. And like, speaking as somebody who is creating a thrash metal song with a dude in Scotland right now, right now, I can't really talk a lot of shit, but like, you know, I think there's something to be said about musicians being in the room and writing together and like having like the sweat together. And it's, I get it if there's bands that are legacy bands. Like, I don't think Earth Crisis or Integrity, like that they all need to be sitting in the same room to like get the vibe together to go play some shows. But, you know, and I understand that life, like they've, you know, you've already started, but I would think young bands have to have that genesis period where they're like in the room sweating together. Just my personal opinion, but I do think there's something lost, you know.
I feel like you're not really in a band until you've been sitting there arguing with another member and one of them storms out. When you've done that, then you're officially a band. You know what I mean? Like when you're
Yeah.
actually like that's you could be best friends in the world. You know what I mean? Once you start like sharing art, there's compromises that need to be made, and sometimes it doesn't go smoothly.
Right. Now, we've talked narrowly about how you got into things, but like you have a wide variety of metal that you listen to. Like as far as, you're one of the people I know that just like literally listens to everything, and like you take on musical projects all the time, like to make sure you're listening to things and to explore these things. Can you tell me some of your philosophy or theories on that, and how you like kind of got into that, and that how that led to doing A Dangerous Meeting?
Basically, it's just like there's so much metal and there's just so much music out there that I feel like I have to get my hands. I at least want to like hear all of it, and I never will. And that kind of is what keeps me going. It's like I'm still finding bands from like 1984 that I had no
Yeah.
idea existed. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. You know what I mean? So at the same time, it makes it hard to keep up with what's current when you're still trying to dig around for like little nuggets from like your own era. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's I luckily have a job where I can like drive around and listen to a lot of things and like and try a lot of things out so I can like listen to what I need to and be like, okay, I want to play this on the show, I want to play this on the show. And not to mention, I spend way too much money on physical media, and because I became addicted to that, because when I lived with my parents, like I would always kind of have to hide it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, 'cause I grew up in a very Christian home, so like I would have to like hide it and hoard it. It's like I don't know. I just really just started going nuts collecting once I moved out, and now I have a separate room of the house that's filled up with everything.
Right. Well, and so you do sometimes like you'll do projects like I'm gonna listen to like 100 records or
Oh
like
yeah.
one record a
Like,
day, like and write
yeah,
about it or
I do that a
what.
lot. That keeps me going. Absolutely. I love to do that. Like there was like one year where I was like, okay, I'm gonna see how many albums I listened to this year, and I think it reached something like 1,600 something records that year. It was something absurd. But like, and I just like to do that to make sure that I'm like keeping it open. I'm not listening to the same 5 records over and over again. And I love the social media aspect of it, because then I can be like, someone will be like, oh, I've never heard that record, or oh, if you like that record, you should check out this record that you've never heard. Because when you're putting up 1,600 different records, chances are that someone's going to recommend 400 that you've never heard.
Yeah. And look, I've found records that I've listened to from following you online and being like, oh, okay, that's weird. I've never heard of that one, or that sounds interesting. And definitely I always look at your playlist for Dangerous Meeting, even though like I've only listened to a couple episodes, but I always look at the playlist. I always do. And I'm always
Thank
curious
you.
what people pick, and like what themes they go for and things like that. And it's always curious to me like how people do that. And I liked that. I was it Carl who did all Syracuse bands like
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
yeah, that was
he did like
great.
different Syracuse straight edge bands over the years, and like a couple of them that I'd never heard of. Like I wish I could remember the name of the first one. They wrote the song "E.T. Rules the Pit," and I can't remember the name of the band at this moment.
Oh yeah, that was new to me too. That was like pre everything. Like
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that was hilarious. I did, of course, I listened to that episode with Carl, but
Oh, of course.
uh, uh, I, am endlessly fascinated by like I've said already, like the history of scenes, and because I shortly lived in Syracuse for about 4 or 5 years, like when I was there, I was always asking questions about the scene before my time because I was curious about it. And so it's funny because I've had people say to me, like, why do you know so much about like Syracuse before you lived there? And it's like, well, I do the same thing with San Diego, right? When I'm here. And I just think it's good to like, I think that history of that lost music scene is so important because for me, there's a bunch of bands from Indiana that I fucking love that I wish more people knew of, but they just don't know them because they didn't have like a huge impact out of their city. And so Syracuse does have like a really great music scene
I've always
to
said that Syracuse is like the hidden gem of music in like the world, because we have all sorts of great music of all different genres here. If you're into like explosions in the sky and like that whole like post metal thing, we've got Unicon, The Burning River. If you're into like the hardcore thing, it's continued on. You know what I mean? Like Deal with God and All for All and like Street Hassle are all doing it really well. Like there's death metal bands, there's black metal bands. It's continued on, but the problem is, and I call it Syracuse syndrome. We have the greatest talent, but nobody can tour because everyone has other obligations. So it's forced to stay here in the city.
right. Well, but that's what I'm saying, Book, and I've talked with you about this. Is I feel the same way about Indiana. I can look at Indiana and say like we've had a couple breakout bands, Split Lip, Burn It Down, whatever. But like we have an amazing, or Time in Malta, for example, is a band that came from Indiana that moved away and then
Love
became
that
like
band.
right. And so like two of the guys in time. Okay, so the bass player from Time in Malta before he was in Burn It Down, but he had a grindcore band when he was growing up called Blatherskite that I know I've preached to you. But Blatherskite, when I was growing up, was one of the fucking best metal bands to see live. And their sound is like this insane, weird cross between thrash, grind, and death metal, but it's not any one of the three.
Okay.
And it's an example of like people from Indiana, like when we talk about Blatherskite, we'll just be like, oh, dude, Blatherskite. The same way probably like people in Syracuse do about Blood Runs Black, right?
Yep. Bonus Black or Violent Fury.
Violent Fury is another, yeah. And so for Indiana, we have two. Like there's also we have a Drop Dead, not the same crust punk Drop Dead that everyone knows, but we had a thrash metal Drop Dead that is hilariously goofy thrash metal. But everyone from Indiana, just like if you talk about Indiana's Drop Dead, they're just like, oh yeah, dude, Drop Dead were amazing. And they opened every thrash show that came through. So every big thrash band, DRI, Slayer, whoever, like Drop Dead played those shows, and it was amazing. And so I feel the same way about Indiana that you do about Syracuse. Rob Pennington feels the same way about Louisville. I'm telling you, like, it's one of those cool things that you discover when you move to other places, that like there are these hidden bands and gems. And I'm not degrading what you've got in Syracuse. You're right. But I'm just saying that there are other, I think it's everywhere. I think the underground before our time, or before the internet, is just an untapped crazy thing. And there's, like you said, there's still music to discover. And that's one of the cool things I think about it.
And even when you have like things like Bandcamp, you know what I mean? Like there's so many bands out there on Bandcamp. You could look up like on any city, and there's bands that you didn't even know existed if you lived there, who have like, oh look, they've been doing it for 10 years. Here's like 4 full records. Like who the hell are these guys?
Right. So you were doing these projects, but how did Dangerous Meetings start? So you started like, you're like obviously like you're such an encyclopedia of metal that the idea of you doing a radio show. And by the way, before we get into this, one of the reasons I guess I've moved over one of the issues that's one of the things we've always bonded on, and it's important to the show.
The fucking
which
king.
Is the fact, the first times we ever talked in the late 90s is because someone told you David is a massive King Diamond fan.
I believe that was Ryan Canavan. It was either Ryan Canavan or Maynard. One of those two.
And it's true. I was a massive, and it's funny because Spotify Shuffle just played Egypt by A Mercyful Fate when I was about to get on here, and I was like, it's reading my mind. It knows. Yes, I am a massive King Diamond and Mercyful Fate fan, and part of the reason why is I'm a horror guy, right? And he tells horror stories, and I've always loved King Diamond. Saw King Diamond in '99 in New York City, and so our first conversation, like in the 90s, you came up to me at a hardcore show and was like, hey, I heard you're really into King Diamond. That's awesome. And I remember we nerded out about Mercyful Fate and King Diamond for like probably 40 minutes.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember because it was at the Westcott Community Center, and I could see it. It was at the Westcott Community Center, and you were standing with, he was running a distro at the time. His name slips me. He was running I can't remember the name of his distro, but he was selling all vegan straight edge hardcore stuff.
Shane Lamers.
Yes, Shane. And I bought a Culture CD off him, and he said to me, "I hope you know you just bought garbage." And I was like, I love this. So like, and then and we got to talking about King and things, just and yeah, they went from there.
Have you ever heard the Deus Ephraim story about Culture?
No.
It was the same fest that the gun went off, the Hungry Charlie's fest, and John from Deus Ephraim and I were standing outside talking to Carl Beekner, and this was when Carl had a beeper on him because his son Charles was about to be born. And we were sitting outside talking to Carl, and these like really like corny looking vegan straight edge kids came and sat down and were just like listening to us talk. And John and Carl were John from Deus Ephraim, the singer, and he goes by Carrie now, but John and Carl were talking, and then John just was like, he's like, oh my God, this fest is driving me nuts. All the bands are fucking terrible. And Culture and Morning Again were literally about to play like an hour later. And then Carl trying, like, knowing that these kids were in Culture and Morning Again, were sitting there, like, trying to, like, he's like, oh, well, he's like, yeah, but the Florida bands are really good. I'm really excited about the Florida bands. And John didn't know that the Culture guys were sitting there. And he's like, are you talking about Culture? That band sucks. They have a song about deforestation called Deforestation. Why don't I write a song about abortion called Abortion? That's stupid. those dudes are sitting there, and Carl's just like, ugh.
That's
And he
funny.
was like, and it was so funny because then one of the dudes is like, I'm in culture. And John looks at him and goes, sorry, dude, your band sucks. And it was so funny. That's how they got the reputation for being egomaniacs and cocky. The Day of Suffering guys is because of that situation.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Because like and that was probably Damien. He probably took it on the chin and laughed. But I actually interviewed Damien probably like 40 episodes ago, which was he was the singer for Culture and for Morning Again for a little bit, and Shai Hulud and Ask Friends Russ and stuff. And he was actually a really really cool interview. And he's doing a death metal band with a drummer from Dismember now.
Wow.
Yeah,
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he went all post-hardcore, like not into that stuff anymore, but guess not.
He's still doing the post-hardcore thing, but he's still doing the death metal thing for sure as well. Like the post-hardcore Damien Dunn stuff is actually really good if you're into stuff like The Cure and like Slowdive and things like that.
Oh, awesome. I'll check it out. Well, and so you decided to do this radio show. How did this start? Like what was the formation?
I saw an ad for it online. Actually, they were looking for DJs, and I knew Greg Yeti was doing his show. He's plays in the Flashing Astonishers, who were like a My Bloody Valentine style band around here for like 30 years now. And he was doing a show of like playing all that sorts of stuff. So I reached out to their owner. I was like, "Hey, I have an idea for this show." And I would interview people from Syracuse, and I would like talk about like 5 songs that made them want to play, and kind of be like a different kind of interview because they'll be more open to talk about like other bands' music than their own, because people get awkward when you're talking about your own music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you always remember that first time you heard your favorite song, and it's always a great story to tell. And so I figured that would be a really, really great show. And so I ran through so many local people, and then like people started being like, oh, you should start getting bigger people. So I kind of like, oh, maybe I should. And I started reaching out to a couple, and people started agreeing. So now I kind of go internationally as well as local. And like some of the interviews have been really, really funny. And there's definitely ones that none of them have gone terrible, but there's definitely ones that I prefer over others.
Right. Well, as somebody who's done that, like well, I cover retro science fiction mostly from the 60s and 70s through dickheads. And so twice I've had like 80-year-old science fiction writers on. And like one was this guy, Barry Maltzberg, who's like, he wrote really naughty science fiction in the 60s and 70s, right? And but he's in his 80s now. And he also wrote erotica on the side of it under a pen name. And a really interesting guy. But when the interview started, like the first questions I asked, he kept saying like, I wrote an essay about it, you can read it. And I was like, that's not how interviews work, dude.
Right. Right.
I'm sure you had to learn a lot about interviewing. Do you feel like you've gotten better at it as time
I've gotten a lot better along the way, absolutely. Like that's why it was great to start with my friends at first, because then I can kind of get like more comfortably doing it. You know what I mean? Like my first interview was Jocko, and like he and I like have been friends for years, so it was cool to go to his house and set it up. But like I definitely made a lot of mistakes over the years. Like especially like technologically wise, like setting up microphones, like leaving the cell phone on during the interview, like just asking awkward questions, that like things like that. But you learn as you go along to make things right. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and so you always open the show. So the show is called A Dangerous Mean, which, if people don't know, is a Mercyful Fate. Yes, and
best metal band in the damn world.
Yeah, and so your favorite band in the world is Mercyful Fate, and so you always play either a Mercyful Fate or a King Diamond song at the beginning of every show, which of course I respect immensely. And then from there you go to the theme of like whoever you're interviewing, and then you do their playlist, and you make a playlist. And usually I'm sure you do playlists related to something similar to what the guests are doing.
A lot of times I lean that way. Sometimes I go off the cuff because I'll get like a whole bunch of new singles that are all over the place that I'll want to play. So it'll kind of like be like a weird salad. But more often than not, I do like to kind of like go with a theme. Like I just did edited one today for Butcher Babies, and it's a lot of like female and like fun punk oriented stuff as well. So
yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And it's interesting because you find the digital ways that people do things like, how do you find like not new 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 metal? Because for hardcore, I found like there's a YouTube channel, this guy Brutal Youth, and like he literally puts up every hardcore demo or 7-inch from around the world, like almost on a daily basis. So you can always like, there's always like a new 7-inch like pretty much every day, and they're mostly garbage. But like one out of every like 20, I'm like, this is really good. I'm gonna follow this band. I'm gonna find this band on Spotify or Bandcamp. So you get like, one out of every 20 I like, to be honest.
Right.
But I check them all out, and my biggest problem is most of the vocals these days are terrible. Most people who sing for hardcore bands shouldn't, this day and age. They don't have the voices for it. But how do you find metal these days? Like, what's your main way of doing it? Because you're still
all
a
over
physical
the
media
place.
guy.
A lot of times I follow labels. You know what I mean? Like anything that comes out on Dark Descent is going to be good. Iron Bonehead puts out some pretty good stuff, and then you kind of like look at like, I don't know, like maybe like what T-shirts those guys are wearing inside the scene, like the way that I used to when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Or like my friend Alex is a complete nerd for what's going on in like other countries like Finland and the death metal scene, and he's always like sending me like links like, oh dude, you got to check this band out, you got to check this band out. And a lot of times he's right, but a lot of times like like band names are getting like so crazy that I can't really remember them all. You know what I mean? They sound like they're the names of medications.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it is funny. I think I did a post recently about, there was some band name that I was like, this is a sign that we've gone way too far on the band name thing. It's like, but what are there any new bands that are right now like your super passion?
Oh man, I could go on for a long time. Like recently, I just bought the new Thanafaxis. They are a completely anonymous band. No one knows who they are, or where they're from, but they play like a cross of like scathing black metal, like kind of like doom laden. Like I've never really heard anything else like it. If you like stuff like Deathspell Omega, you would really like that. But I've been playing a lot of the classics lately, honestly. Like I just bought another copy of Napalm Death's Harmony Corruption because I lost my tape over there like a long time ago, and I saw that it just was there at the record store. I said screw it, and I grabbed that, and I've been playing that quite a bit. And just lots of things have been coming out lately. I'm trying to think like the Abyssal Ellersith split. It's really cool. It's like two bands from the UK that are like really dissonant death metal. That's really good. The Moonlight Sorcery EP is another black metal band from Finland. If you're into things like Dimmu Borgir without the cheese, like back in the day.
Was there ever a time that Dimmu Borgir did not have the cheese?
Yes. Well, it depends on what you consider cheese and black metal. You know, I mean, there's a certain amount that you allow. You know what I mean? Like you allow the corpse paint in the forests and the Satan and all that. Like, but once you get to like the part where you're like, Mortice, or you're like Immortal, like running around making goofy faces in the woods. You know what I mean? Like then that's a little too cheesy. But like yeah, early Dimmu Borgir, the first two records like Stormblast and For All Tid, they were very straightforward, like no gimmick black metal records.
Yeah. And I admit I don't deep dive as much into the music as I used to. I listen to mostly the big bands and stuff like that. I'm a huge like Catatonia is one of my favorite bands. I've been on a Nevermore kick lately. And as the new Meshuggah album, I think is
it's awesome.
Is really good. So I don't dig as deep, but a lot of times when I see bands on your playlist, I'll like go check them out. So like, yeah, and do find them. So, what's your system of like choosing songs for the show?
Oh man, it's it's basically like it's usually like 2 or 3 days beforehand, and I'll sit there and I have like my whole collection loaded into iTunes. You know what I mean? And so I'll just kind of be like, okay, like there's 2,000 artists to choose through here. What are we gonna do? You know what I mean? And I'll be like, okay, well, first of all, what's the theme? And I'll go through and I'll have like limited down to maybe like 100, and be like, okay, let's pick out things that aren't like 15 minutes a piece, and then weed all that out. And then like usually a lot of it is very random, and a lot of it is what I'm listening to at the time and on repeat.
Right. So And when you're, so do you have any like dream guests or people that you're working on or people that you would like,
I mean, obviously King Diamond is
yes.
he would be like the ultimate. But yeah, man, there's people who I would really love to do. I would like to talk to Alex Webster. I think that would be really cool. I think it would be really great to talk to Hank Sherman from Mercyful, honestly, as well, just because he's my favorite like heavy metal guitar player of all time. And
Yeah.
there's just so many people who I would love to talk to. You know what I mean? I would like love to talk to Chuck Billy from Testament.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, anybody involved. Testament's my favorite thrash band. So, and like up there with my favorite metal bands of all time. And I think, boy, dude, I couldn't believe their new drummer too. Like that they found somebody who's younger who could fill in. I thought they would have to have Chuck Hoagland or Dave Lombardo for the rest of eternity, that they would never be able to have anybody else. And
Right. I see. I didn't even know that they found somebody. Last I knew that they had Dave Lombardo, but he had said that he wasn't going to do it anymore for one reason or another. I hadn't heard an announcement they had found someone else, so I'm glad that they did.
they found a guy doing like drum covers of like he was from the Boston area and he's a young dude who was doing drum covers of songs off he did like Children of the Next Level and like I can't remember what other song, but like and they flew him out and had him do rehearsal and like he's killing it in Europe now. Like
That's awesome. You know, he's got some shoes to fill, man, because Hoagland's no slouch. And he
no,
did some
he's
really
one of
good
the
work
best.
on those records.
Yeah, he's one of the best drummers of all time. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I love nerding out with you a little bit. I one thing I want to do is I want you to give me a list of five Syracuse bands that you want me to dig deep into and my listeners to dig deep into, and then I'm going to give you five Indiana bands.
That sounds fair, but man, five bands. So that's trying to
So
think
I
what
just hit you with this, so I can go first if you want me to.
Yeah, well,
And I'm
why
not
don't
going just metal, by the way. I'm just gonna.
you know what? I'm not gonna go just metal either. So
Okay.
so go
So
right
we're
ahead.
gonna we're gonna challenge each other to find and it's gonna be a little well because I know some of the bands from Syracuse, so you don't have to do Blood Runs Black with me because I
Right.
saw Blood Runs Black and all that. But do you have a first band? We can do one and one.
Okay, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's a band that's no longer together. The band is called Black Throat Wind. And if you like things like I don't know, maybe like Built to Spill or Me Without You kind of thing, but it really, really has its own thing going on. They only did one demo and one full length, but that one full length is so damn good that I would recommend it to anybody who likes any sort of indie rock whatsoever.
So what was the name of the band again?
Black Throat Wind.
Black Throat Wind. Okay, and they're from Syracuse. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I already mentioned them, but I'm going to mention them again. And I've tried many times I need you to sit down and listen to a Blatherskite album. I will, and I will give you a song that you can start the Rotting Carcass of Christ. It's an environmental song. You wouldn't believe it, but you should know that Todd from Time in Malta, the bass player, singer of Time in Malta, that this was his grindcore thrash band when he was growing up. But you could go to YouTube. There's a live, like at a like cable access version of them playing a show. But Blatherskite's live shows were amazing. They were incredible. And they're a weird band because they have blast beats and they do grindcore sometimes, but sometimes they have like really thrashy parts, and sometimes they get to death metal, but mostly they're screamy, screechy. You'll love it. So my first one is Blatherskite. Okay, your number two Syracuse band.
My number two Syracuse band would be a new band called Easy Blame. It actually features the bass player from Ed Gein, and the drummer used to play. The drummer's actually like one of my best friends for a long time, Brando, and he played in a band called Mouse House, and we did a band called Ocean Spawn together years ago. And they're just really, really it's kind of like page 99 or Majority Rule or City of Caterpillar, but it has a much different vibe to it. I really wouldn't know where to place it. I would put it in the post rock category, but I really wouldn't know who to compare it to. Like, oh, it sounds like this band. But it's they just put out a 7-song CD that's really really good, and they're great dudes and they're a great live band as well.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, so my number 2 is going to be a mod rock band from Indiana called Steve Kulowski. And their bass player went on to be in a famous alternative band called Antenna that was big in the 90s, like that was on like 160 Minutes. But Steve Kulowski, and they had a 7-inch called Can't Find London, which was a hilarious, because they sound like the Jam, but they're from Indiana. And so the song Can't Find London was all about like being a mod in a Midwestern Indiana town. And it's really good. Like if you like the Jam and that kind of like, and their bass player and drummer were incredible. So they had this incredible rhythm section, and then their live shows were amazing. But they used to play a lot of the basement punk shows when I was growing up. And so you can find a few of their songs on YouTube, but they are hard to find. They were amazing. So that's my weird number 2. So your number 3, we're going for 5.
Man, my number 3. Man, I would probably have to say, like, as far as number 3, it's another fairly newish band. They're called Ritual Atrophy. I actually played bass for them for a little bit, but they're doing like they've done plenty of stuff without me. It's anti-fascist black metal, and it's really cool. It's like somewhere between, like, if you take like elements of like Drop Dead and mix it with like Xaster, and it sounds strange, but it's really good, and it works real well. They've been playing around quite a bit, and they just got a new second guitar player, and they're a killing machine now.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to give you the first hardcore band from my hometown that was like a real hardcore scene band, not punk rock, not like, Mohawks or anything like an actual hardcore band. And they transitioned and became like, and this band was called With Authority, and they put out 3 7-inches in my hometown, but they were like the anchor to our hardcore scene. And for example, I saw them with Integrity, and the first time I saw Integrity was I went to see With Authority. I didn't know who Integrity was. But their first 7-inch is bad punk rock. Their second 7-inch sounds like the Cro-Mags. And then by like, they sound like stoner metal on their last record. Okay. But like heavy as shit, like super heavy. And their last drummer was Bob Fouts, who recently passed away. He was the drummer from Burn It Down, Knock Mystium, Gates of Slumber. But Bob played in With Authority before all those bands. And With Authority's 7-inch, I'm going to point you to their second 7-inch, System Screwed. The title song to me sounds like the Cro-Mags, and I think it's good shit. But like, and I saw they opened for Earth Crisis one time in '94, but in Indiana. But outside of Indiana, I don't think I've never heard anybody talk about With Authority, but they're super important in my hometown. So they're not even like that important to Indianapolis, an hour away, because I barely played there. But for Bloomington, they were really important. So that's my number 4. Your number 4.
Okay, right? My number 4 would actually be a band that my brother is in with your friend Carl, called Apocalypse Tribe, and they've got like a really cool like Warzone meets Megadeth thing going on. It's got Carl from Earth Crisis on vocals, Corey from Slapshot on drums, and they've got this dude Elliot on bass, who sounds like he could be like the bass player for Rancid. He plays in like jam bands when he's not doing this, so he's insanely talented.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that record actually, and he sounds like he could play like. This is actually it sounds like he could play in the Dead Kennedys, because like he's playing like really intricate punk rock.
Yeah,
So like,
he's insane. I know for a while they were talking about covering Government Flu actually at one point.
oh, dude,
Um,
that would be amazing. That's one of my favorite Dead Kennedy songs. So
yeah, and like they've been doing they're doing a thing on Spotify where they've been putting up like a new song every month. And I think they've put out maybe like three or four. They haven't been keeping up on it, but there's like three or four new songs they put out this year that are pretty cool tunes.
I had missed that, so I'm gonna have to go check that out. So I love Apocalypse Drive. I like what Carl's been doing.
Nice.
So okay, so my number 5, last Indiana band. Well, I kind of already mentioned them, but I really feel like it would make your day if you listen to Drop Dead from Indiana. This is Hesher Mosh, like from hell. Like you cannot imagine listening to Drop Dead without like that stupid like hair metal Hesher Mosh thing. They have a mosh part in one of their songs where I swear to God the lyrics are "Pray for your salvation. No one gives a fuck." It's to this day it's one of my favorite lyrics ever because it doesn't make any rhythm sense or anything, but I have memories of watching Indiana like Hessian moshers singing along to "Pray for your salvation. No one gives a fuck." So
That's great.
that song alone, I think, will make your day. But as far as like, yeah, that's one that I would say you should definitely check out. So
Okay,
yeah,
you're gonna have to send me links of all these things so I can like check them out and like download them if possible. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I'm telling you, dude, Drop Dead will make your day when you hear it. It's so ridiculously 80s, like Midwestern garage rock thrash, but great. Like, yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. Is there any thrash metal bands from the 80s that Syracuse that I'm not aware? Violent Fury was the
There's
90s,
Violent
but
Fury, and there was a band called The Third Party, who did two demos. I've only got one of the demos called The Party's Just Begun. It's kind of like a more traditional heavy metal kind of thing. I don't think any of them went on to do anything. And there was a band from around here called Sacred Death that did a lot of touring. That I'm
that's
not
a
100%
great
on
name
this.
for for a thrash metal band, Sacred Death.
Yeah, they did a God, I remember hearing them and thinking that they were pretty good. I've never owned their stuff, but there was like the stuff that like the old dudes would talk about. Oh, you got to check out Sacred Death, and I've only heard a few things here and there, but I remember liking what I've heard.
All right, John Bukowski, thanks for nerding out with me. Tell the folks how they can find your podcast because it's a radio show in Syracuse, but most of
Yep.
the people here are going to be finding it as a podcast.
Yep, you can find it on Spotify, and you can find it on like use like the Amazon Alexa, whatever. I'm still waiting on approval from Apple because they are dragging their feet on it, and as most other places other than Apple right now, you're able to find the podcast.
Yeah. I admit I listen to podcasts on Apple, so I'm waiting for that. But yeah, it is it's so cool that you're doing this. I think that you like I enjoyed a lot of the early episodes because of the Syracuse education. And because it's obviously a city I care about and is close to my heart and the weird music that comes out of there. I think it's insane that the Lost Horizon still exists. Um, uh, have they ever done like rehabbed it or done anything to it, or is it
Okay,
exactly the
so
same?
for a little bit, back in the early 2000s, they painted it all sparkly on the inside, and they called it Club Tundra for a little bit and Club 32 Degrees, and that didn't end up working out. So they went under new ownership, and they called it the Lost Rise again. They painted it all back, and other than that, the only real upgrade they made was they took out the center beam in the stage, so it wasn't like obscuring the vocalist anymore.
Oh, the center beam's a huge part of it.
Yeah, they got rid of that.
The loudest show I ever saw in my life, that Neurosis I Hate God tour. That was one of the loudest shows I've ever seen in my life. Was
That
at the Lost. So
that show was awesome. I had to leave before Neurosis played because the person I was riding with didn't want to they wanted to see Overcast, and after I Hate God play, they're like, okay, I think I've had enough. We got to go.
Oh man, that's brutal. That's
Yeah,
brutal.
I've heard everyone say how amazing Neurosis was, and the one time that I saw Neurosis, I was like, this is boring as shit. It's like it was like the Sun That Never Sets record, and I don't really like that record. And they played it from front to back. I'm like, what the fuck? Just get done already. And I never wanted to feel that way about Neurosis before. And when they played in my hometown, it was like for their best fucking record, and it kills me.
Yeah, it was it was that was a show. All right. Book, anything else you want to tell everyone about Dangerous Meeting? Like anything you want to tease coming up or
I mean, like the one that's gonna air tomorrow is going to have the Butcher Babies. I haven't really announced it yet, but after after that will be Matt Kinney from Order of Deceit, and then after that I will be talking to Richie Faulkner from Judas Priest.
wow. Hey,
Yeah,
that's
so
pretty cool.
yeah, some cool things coming up.
Yeah, members of Megadeth and Judas Priest in like pretty short time from each other. So
If I could have told 13-year-old me that I'm doing this now, I'd probably find some way to fucking fast forward.
right. Well, you got here. So
Indeed.
yeah, so Bud, this is awesome. Thanks for nerding out on metal with me. I'll let you yeah,
Anytime. It was great to see you, man.
yeah, totally. I surprised we got this far into the conversation without talking about King Diamond, like we
Well,
just
because the thing about King is like if you get me started talking about him, you're gonna need to give me another hour at least.
right. So we probably don't want to do that. But
Right.
yeah, I mean the thing is that not enough people realize it's like Weird Al and King Diamond are two of the people that like people just don't understand the full level of genius that's going on there,
I never thought of the parallel, but you might be absolutely right.
Well, it's true because people know a lot of you'll hear Bruce Springsteen's a genius or so and so is a genius, but how rarely do you hear those two? So all
Fair enough.
right. All right, buddy. It was good to talk to you. And we'll spread the word. A Dangerous Meeting, new to the podcast airwaves. Get your metal there. And how do people follow you online?
Right now I just have an Instagram. It's A Dangerous Meeting. That's
All
it.
right. All right, there you go. All right, follow me on Instagram, and thanks for listening, folks.
All right.
See
Thanks,
you
David.
later.
All right, later.